My name is Valeria Mendoza. I am 34 years old, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with long dark brown hair, warm brown eyes, and a face that people often told me looked younger than my age. I worked as a primary school teacher in Mexico, and most people who knew me would have described me as patient, cheerful, and compassionate. I spent my days teaching children to read, helping them solve little problems, and reminding them that mistakes did not make them failures. But there was one lesson I had never truly learned myself: how to forgive someone who had deeply wounded me. For years, I carried a grudge against someone I had once loved and trusted with every part of my heart. I told myself I had every right to be angry. I told myself that what happened to me was too painful to simply forget. And whenever someone mentioned forgiveness, I would quietly think, they have no idea what that person did to me. I believed forgiveness was something you offered when the other person deserved it. I did not understand that sometimes forgiveness has very little to do with the person who hurt you, and everything to do with what their actions are doing to your own heart. I had seen the same struggle in people around me. Families stopped speaking because of inheritances. Brothers became strangers because of old arguments. Friends who had once shared everything could spend 20 years refusing to say each other's names. Husbands and wives slept beside one another, while carrying years of resentment. Parents waited for apologies that never came, and children grew into adults, still carrying wounds from words spoken when they were young. Sometimes the person who caused the pain had already moved on, while the wounded person continued reliving the moment every night. I understood that pain because I was living it. There was one particular person whose name could still change my mood in an instant. I had forgiven her with my lips many times, especially when people asked about the past. I would smile and say, "It's okay, I've moved on," but deep inside, I knew I was lying. I had not moved on. I had simply learned how to hide the wound better. I never wished death upon her. I never planned revenge. I never wanted to destroy her life, but whenever I remembered what she had done, something inside me tightened. I replayed the conversations. I remembered the betrayal. I remembered the humiliation. I remembered the nights when I cried alone and wondered how someone I trusted so completely could hurt me so deeply. And then I would tell myself the same thing again. I will forgive her when she apologizes. That sentence became a prison I didn't realize I was building around myself. Then, one ordinary day in Mexico, everything changed. It was a day that had begun like countless others. I had gone to work expecting to teach my students, correct their assignments, and return home before evening. Nothing about that morning warned me that my life was about to be divided into two parts: the life before that moment, and everything that came afterward. Then the ground moved. At first, I thought it was a small tremor. The windows rattled. A few objects fell from shelves. The children became frightened, and suddenly the calm classroom became chaos. Desks moved across the floor. Books dropped around us. The walls seemed to groan. I remember trying to tell everyone to remain calm, but my own voice sounded strangely distant. The shaking became stronger. I remember falling. I remember dust filling the air. I remember hearing people crying and calling for help. And then, I remember darkness. Not ordinary darkness. Silence. Complete silence. For a moment, I didn't understand what had happened. I couldn't feel the ground beneath me. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't hear the voices around me anymore. The fear that had filled my heart just seconds earlier seemed to disappear, replaced by an overwhelming stillness. Then I realized something terrifying. I could see my body. I was no longer looking through my own eyes. I was looking at myself from somewhere else. I saw people rushing around me. I saw the destruction caused by the earthquake. I saw the panic on their faces. But strangely, I could not feel the pain I should have been feeling. I couldn't understand how I could be there and yet somehow not be inside the body lying beneath the debris. Then everything became brighter, and as I moved into that strange light, one thought came into my mind. It wasn't about my job. It wasn't about my family. It wasn't even about the earthquake. It was about the woman I had refused to forgive. I suddenly understood that I could have died carrying that bitterness inside me. For years, I had thought forgiveness was about saying the right words. I thought saying, "I forgive you," was enough. But as I stood between life and something I could not explain, I began to understand that my words had not changed what was happening inside my heart. I had said I forgave her. But I was still angry. I had said I had moved on. But I was still living in the past. I had said I wanted peace. But I was still holding tightly to the very thing that was stealing my peace. And then I saw him. Jesus. I cannot adequately explain what it felt like to become aware of his presence. It was not simply seeing someone standing in front of me. It was as though I suddenly became aware that I was completely known. Every thought I had hidden, every wound I had concealed, every angry thought I had never spoken aloud, nothing could be disguised. And yet, strangely, I did not feel condemned. I felt seen. For the first time in my life, I realized that Jesus knew the entire story behind my anger. He knew what had been done to me. He knew the nights I had cried. He knew the words that had broken me. He knew the apology I had waited for and never received. But he also knew something I had never understood. I was still allowing the person who hurt me to occupy a room inside my heart. And that was when Jesus began to show me something about forgiveness that would completely change the way I understood my own life. He showed me that forgiveness does not mean saying that what happened was acceptable. It does not mean pretending the betrayal never happened. It does not mean allowing someone to hurt you again. It does not always mean returning to the relationship. And it certainly does not mean that justice no longer matters. Instead, he began revealing to me something much deeper. Sometimes, forgiveness is the quiet decision to stop carrying a debt that was never meant to become your permanent burden. I had spent years waiting for the person who hurt me to release me by apologizing. But I was beginning to understand that perhaps I had been waiting for freedom from the wrong person. The person who wounded me might never apologize. She might never understand how deeply she had affected me. She might never admit what she had done. But Jesus was showing me that my freedom did not have to depend on her decision. And then I heard the words that would stay with me for the rest of my life. You cannot change what they did, but you can choose what you carry forward. I looked back at the life I had lived and realized how much of it had been shaped by one painful moment. I had allowed an old wound to influence new relationships. I had become suspicious of people who had never harmed me. I had protected myself so fiercely from being hurt again that I had also protected myself from fully trusting and loving others. I thought I was punishing the person who hurt me. But she wasn't carrying my anger. I was. That realization broke something inside me. And as I stood in that place I could not explain, I began to understand why true forgiveness can sometimes be silent. There may be no conversation, no apology, no dramatic reunion, no message sent, no announcement made. Sometimes forgiveness happens quietly, between a wounded heart and God. Sometimes nobody else even knows it has happened. And perhaps that is what makes it so powerful. Because true forgiveness is not always about telling the person, "I forgive you." Sometimes it is about finally telling your own heart, "I refuse to live inside this pain anymore." I did not yet know whether I would return to my body. I did not know whether my family would ever see me again. I did not know whether the earthquake had taken my life permanently. But I knew one thing. If I was given another chance to live, I could not return as the same woman who had entered that disaster, because I had entered that moment carrying a grudge. And I was about to discover I did not know that I was dead. That was the strange part. I had always imagined death as something terrifying, something filled with darkness, fear, and pain. I thought the final moment would be a struggle, that I would desperately hold on to life and refuse to let go. But when my heart stopped beneath the ruins of that earthquake, I experienced something completely different. The pain disappeared first, then the noise disappeared, and finally, even the fear disappeared. I felt as though something invisible had lifted me out of the physical world, and suddenly, I was no longer trapped beneath concrete, dust, and broken walls. I was somewhere I had never been before. I could still see what was happening below me. I saw people moving around the rubble. I saw rescuers searching desperately. I saw my own body lying motionless beneath the destruction, and for a few moments I could not understand how I could be watching myself from above. I wanted to tell them that I was still there. I wanted to tell my family that I loved them. I wanted to tell everyone that I wasn't ready to leave. But when I tried to speak, no sound came out. Then I felt a presence. It was impossible to compare it to anything I had experienced on Earth. It wasn't merely warmth, although I felt surrounded by something warmer than anything I had ever known. It wasn't merely peace, although every trace of fear had disappeared. It was the overwhelming awareness that I was standing before someone who knew me completely. And then I saw Jesus. I cannot explain his appearance in a way that would do justice to what I experienced. I remember his eyes most clearly. There was something about his eyes that made me feel completely exposed and completely safe at the same time. I knew that nothing about me was hidden from him. He knew my childhood. He knew my disappointments. He knew every secret prayer I had whispered when nobody was listening. He knew the things I was ashamed of. He knew the people I had loved. He knew the people I had stopped loving. And he knew the person I had refused to forgive. I expected him to show me heaven. I expected to see something magnificent, something beyond human imagination. I thought perhaps I would see angels, beautiful landscapes, or the glory I had heard about throughout my life. Instead, Jesus looked at me with a gentleness that I will never forget. And somehow, without him needing to accuse me, I knew exactly what he wanted me to see. My heart. Not my physical heart. The hidden part of me. The part nobody else could see. Suddenly, memories began appearing before me. I saw moments from my life that I had forgotten. I saw people I had hurt unintentionally. I saw moments when I had been impatient. I saw times when someone needed kindness and I had been too busy to notice. But one memory stood above all the others. The betrayal. It came back with incredible clarity. I remembered exactly what had happened. I remembered the trust I had placed in that person. I remembered how quickly everything had fallen apart. I remembered sitting alone afterward, crying and asking myself how someone I loved could do something like that. For years I had protected that pain. I had polished it. I had replayed it. I had kept it alive. Whenever I remembered the betrayal, I reminded myself why I was justified in being angry. But standing before Jesus, I suddenly saw the wound differently. I realized that there was a difference between remembering what someone had done and continuing to carry the emotional debt of what they had done. Jesus did not tell me that the betrayal had been acceptable. He did not tell me that I had imagined the pain. He did not tell me that I should pretend nothing had happened. Instead, I understood something much deeper. He was showing me that forgiveness does not rewrite history. It changes the way history controls you. I had spent years thinking that if I forgave the person, I would somehow be declaring that what she had done wasn't serious. I thought forgiveness would mean admitting that my pain wasn't important. But Jesus showed me that I had misunderstood forgiveness completely. Forgiveness wasn't saying, "It didn't matter." It was saying, "It mattered, it hurt me, but I refused to allow it to own the rest of my life." That realization was overwhelming. I began to cry. I told Jesus that I didn't know how to forgive her. And in that moment, I understood that he already knew. He knew that every time I said, "I forgive her," there was still a part of me waiting for justice. There was still a part of me imagining the apology I wanted. There was still a part of me hoping that one day she would finally understand what she had done to me. I had been calling that forgiveness. But it wasn't complete forgiveness. It was conditional forgiveness. I was saying, I forgive you, but only if you eventually understand. I forgive you, but only if you apologize. I forgive you, but only if you admit that you were wrong. I forgive you, but I will keep reminding myself of what you did whenever I need a reason to hate you. And Jesus showed me that this was not freedom. It was another form of bondage. Then something happened that I will never forget. I saw myself standing on earth, living my ordinary life, carrying that anger everywhere I went. I saw how the wound had changed me. I saw how I sometimes became defensive when people tried to get close to me. I saw how I expected betrayal before trust had even been earned. I saw how I sometimes reacted to innocent people because I was still responding to the actions of someone from my past. The person who had hurt me was no longer present in most of those moments, but her actions were. She wasn't controlling my life directly. My unwillingness to release the pain was doing it for her. That realization pierced me. Jesus showed me that forgiveness was not a gift I was giving to the person who had hurt me. It was a door I was opening for myself. And then I understood why true forgiveness could be silent. I had always believed forgiveness required a conversation. I thought I needed to sit across from the person, explain my pain, hear an apology, and then say the words, I forgive you. But what if the apology never came? What if the person had died? What if the person refused to admit what they had done? What if speaking to them would only reopen the wound? What if reconciliation wasn't safe or wise? Jesus showed me that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. You can forgive someone without returning to the relationship. You can release resentment without giving someone permission to hurt you again. You can wish someone peace without inviting them back into your life. You can stop carrying hatred without pretending the wound never existed. And sometimes, the most powerful forgiveness happens when nobody else is watching. There is no audience. No announcement. No dramatic conversation. Just a quiet decision between you, your wounded heart, and God. I remember looking at Jesus and feeling ashamed that I had spent so many years believing my anger was protecting me. But I understood that he wasn't humiliating me. He was freeing me. Then I saw something else. I saw the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. Forgetting is something the human mind cannot always command. Some wounds leave memories behind. Some betrayals change us permanently. Some experiences remain part of our story. Jesus wasn't asking me to erase the memory. He was asking me to remove the poison from it. I could remember without hating. I could remember without seeking revenge. I could remember without wishing destruction upon the person. I could remember and still choose peace. That was when I understood that forgiveness was not weakness. It was strength under control. It was choosing not to become the same kind of person that had wounded you. It was refusing to allow someone else's darkness to become your own. Then Jesus showed me something about the words, I forgive you. Those words can be beautiful. But words alone cannot heal a heart that is still holding tightly to resentment. A person can say, I forgive you, while secretly hoping the other person suffers. A person can say, I forgive you, while collecting evidence of every mistake the other person has ever made. A person can say, I forgive you, and still spend years wishing they had never existed. Jesus showed me that true forgiveness begins when the heart finally releases its demand to personally carry the punishment. That doesn't mean justice should disappear. It means vengeance no longer belongs in your hands. I suddenly remembered all the times I had prayed for God to change the person who hurt me. But standing there, I realized that I had rarely asked God to change my own heart. I wanted her to become different. Jesus was showing me that he wanted me to become free. Then the most painful realization came. I had spent years waiting for someone else to say sorry before I allowed myself to have peace. I had placed the key to my peace in the hands of the person who had wounded me. And Jesus was showing me that I didn't have to do that anymore. I could forgive even if she never apologized. I could release the anger even if she never understood. I could surrender the pain even if she never knew I had done it. That was the power of silent forgiveness. It wasn't silent because it was weak. It wasn't silent because it was weak. It wasn't silent because it was weak. I didn't need to prove that I was the bigger person. I didn't need her to praise me for forgiving her. I didn't need anyone else to know. I simply needed to let God take the burden I had carried for so long. And when I finally surrendered it, something inside me changed. The heaviness disappeared. I felt lighter, not because the past had been erased, not because the betrayal had suddenly become acceptable, but because I was no longer carrying it as a weapon against myself. For the first time, I understood that forgiveness was not primarily about releasing someone else from what they had done. It was about releasing myself from the prison I had built around that memory. And then Jesus showed me something that frightened me deeply. He showed me how short life really is. One moment, I had been standing in a classroom. The next, I was looking at my own lifeless body. I had always assumed there would be more time. More time to apologize. More time to forgive. More time to tell people I loved them. More time to repair broken relationships. But standing there, I realized that none of us knows how much time we have. And suddenly, forgiveness stopped looking like something I could postpone. It became something I needed to take seriously. Because the earthquake had taught me something no ordinary day ever could. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. And there are some things we should not carry into tomorrow if we have the opportunity to surrender them today. I looked at Jesus, and for the first time, I was ready to let go. Not because the person deserved it. Not because the betrayal wasn't serious. Not because I had forgotten. But because I finally understood that my heart was worth more than the hatred I had been protecting. And then Jesus began to show me what would happen if I truly released it. What I saw next changed the way I would understand forgiveness for the rest of my life. What Jesus showed me next was something I had never considered before. I had always imagined forgiveness as a conversation between two people. One person hurts the other, the wounded person confronts them, the offender apologizes, and then forgiveness takes place. But Jesus showed me that sometimes there is no apology, no conversation, and no second chance. Sometimes the person who hurt you will never understand the damage they caused. Sometimes they will never admit they were wrong. And sometimes they may never even know that you have forgiven them. Yet forgiveness can still happen. I found myself standing in what looked like a vast open space, and suddenly I could see scenes from my own life unfolding around me. They were not memories in the ordinary sense. They felt alive. I could see myself as a young woman, trusting people easily, believing that the people I loved would always protect my heart. Then I saw the moment that trust was broken. I watched myself afterward, crying alone, and trying to understand how someone could hurt me so deeply. But then I saw something I had never noticed while I was alive. The person who had hurt me had continued living. She had gone to work. She had laughed. She had eaten meals. She had celebrated birthdays. She had made new memories. And there I was, years later, still returning to the same painful moment in my mind. I suddenly understood something frightening. The event had happened once, but I had been making myself experience it over and over again. Every time I replayed the betrayal, every time I imagined what I should have said, every time I wished she would finally understand what she had done, I was reopening the wound. The past could not physically reach me anymore. But my memories were keeping its influence alive. Jesus showed me that bitterness can become so familiar that a wounded person begins to mistake it for justice. I had thought holding on to anger meant that I was refusing to let the person get away with what she had done. But Jesus showed me that there was a difference between justice and resentment. Justice says, "What happened was wrong." Resentment says, "I will continue suffering because what happened was wrong." Justice can be surrendered to God. Resentment stays inside the wounded heart, and the longer it stays there, the heavier it becomes. Then I saw something else. I saw two people carrying heavy bags. One person had a small bag. The other was carrying an enormous one. As they walked, the person with the larger bag kept stopping to complain about the person who had supposedly given it to them. I understood immediately. The bag represented unforgiveness, and the strange thing was that the person who had caused the original pain was not carrying it. I was. I had been carrying the weight of someone else's actions and wondering why I felt exhausted. Jesus showed me that forgiveness was not pretending the bag had never been placed in my hands. It was choosing to put it down. I remember thinking, but what if she doesn't deserve forgiveness? And the answer that came into my heart was deeper than words. Forgiveness is not always about what the other person deserves. Sometimes it is about what you refuse to allow their actions to continue doing to you. That changed everything. I had spent years asking whether she deserved my forgiveness. Jesus was teaching me to ask a different question. Do I want to spend the rest of my life carrying this? And the answer was no. I didn't want to. I wanted to live. I wanted to love people, without constantly expecting betrayal. I wanted to laugh without remembering someone else's cruelty. I wanted to wake up without replaying old conversations. I wanted to experience peace that didn't depend on another person's apology. Then Jesus showed me something even more difficult. He showed me that silent forgiveness sometimes means forgiving someone who will never know. At first, I struggled with that. I thought, if she doesn't know I've forgiven her, what difference does it make? But I began to understand. Forgiveness is not a performance. It isn't something we do so the other person can applaud us. It is a decision of the heart. There are times when the healthiest thing you can do is forgive someone without contacting them at all. You may never send the message. You may never make the phone call. You may never sit across from them. You may simply kneel somewhere alone and say, "God, I release this person to you. I will no longer carry hatred for what happened. I surrender the need to personally punish them." That prayer may never reach the person's ears, but it can change the person praying it. Jesus showed me that this was the secret power of silent forgiveness. The offender may never change, but the wounded person can. And that was the part I had never understood. I had been waiting for someone else's behavior to change before I allowed my heart to heal. Jesus was showing me that healing could begin even when the other person remained exactly the same. Then I saw my own future. I saw what my life could have looked like if I had continued holding on to the anger. I saw myself becoming older, but not necessarily becoming freer. I saw myself carrying the same story into new relationships. I saw myself becoming suspicious, defensive, and emotionally distant. I saw innocent people paying the price for something they had never done. A new friend would make a mistake, and I would remember the old betrayal. Someone would fail to call me back, and I would wonder whether they were abandoning me. Someone would disagree with me, and part of me would prepare for another betrayal. I realized that unresolved pain can make you fight battles that aren't actually happening. You can begin defending yourself against ghosts. You can punish new people for the sins of old people. And you can miss beautiful relationships because your heart is still standing at the door of an old wound. Jesus was showing me that forgiveness was not only about the past. It was about protecting the future. Then I saw another scene. I saw myself holding a key. The key represented my future, but attached to the key was a chain. At the other end of the chain was the memory of the person who had hurt me. I suddenly understood why I had felt unable to move forward. I was trying to walk into a new life while dragging an old relationship behind me. Jesus didn't tell me that I had to forget her. He didn't tell me that I had to trust her again. He didn't tell me that I had to invite her back into my life. He showed me something much simpler. I had to stop allowing her actions to determine who I would become. That distinction was incredibly important. Forgiveness did not mean removing every boundary. Forgiveness did not mean tolerating abuse. Forgiveness did not mean ignoring wisdom. Forgiveness did not mean pretending that dangerous people were safe. I could forgive someone and still keep my distance. I could forgive someone and still say no. I could forgive someone and still protect myself and my family. I could forgive someone without giving them another opportunity to hurt me. That realization gave me peace, because I had always feared that forgiveness meant becoming vulnerable to the same pain again. But Jesus showed me that forgiveness and wisdom can exist together. You can release the hatred while keeping the boundary. You can surrender revenge while still pursuing justice through appropriate means. You can pray for someone while refusing to place yourself in harm's way. And you can wish someone healing without making them part of your life again. Then Jesus showed me something about apologies. I had spent years waiting for one. I wanted to hear the words, "I'm sorry." I wanted her to look me in the eyes and acknowledge the damage. I wanted her to understand how many nights I had cried. But Jesus showed me that I had allowed an apology to become the condition for my freedom. And what if the apology never came? Would I remain imprisoned forever? The answer became obvious. No. My healing could not depend entirely on another person's willingness to recognize my pain. That was one of the hardest truths I had ever faced. Sometimes you have to forgive people who never say sorry. Not because their behavior was acceptable. Not because their actions didn't matter. But because your life is too valuable to remain permanently chained to an apology that may never arrive. Then I felt something I had never felt before. I felt compassion, not approval, not agreement. Compassion. I began to see the person who had hurt me as a human being, who was also broken in ways I could not fully understand. That did not erase what she had done. But it changed the hatred inside me. I no longer needed her to suffer before I could feel peace. I no longer needed to imagine her regretting everything before I could move forward. I simply wanted to be free. And then Jesus showed me the most beautiful part. He showed me what happened inside a heart when forgiveness was genuine. The bitterness began to lose its power. The memory remained, but it no longer controlled the emotions attached to it. The wound became a scar. The scar became a reminder, and the reminder became a testimony. I understood that some of the greatest evidence that forgiveness has taken place is not that you can no longer remember what happened. It is that you can remember it without wanting to destroy the person who caused it. You can remember and still breathe. You can remember and still pray. You can remember and still love other people. You can remember and finally say, "That happened to me, but it will not define me." I began to understand why Jesus had allowed me to see all of this. He wasn't asking me to deny my pain. He was asking me not to build my identity around it. I had become the woman who was betrayed, but Jesus wanted me to become the woman who was healed. Those two identities were completely different. Then he showed me something about silent forgiveness that I will never forget. Sometimes the person you forgive may never know that you did it. They may never thank you. They may never apologize. They may never change. They may even continue believing that they were right. And yet, you can still release them. Because forgiveness is not always about closing the relationship. Sometimes, it is about closing the wound. I suddenly thought about all the people on earth who were carrying similar burdens. A mother who hadn't spoken to her daughter in years. Two brothers fighting over an inheritance. A husband and wife sleeping in the same room, but emotionally living worlds apart. A friend betrayed by another friend. A child carrying painful words spoken by a parent decades earlier. People everywhere were carrying invisible burdens that nobody else could see. And I understood why Jesus wanted me to share this message. Some people are waiting for the other person to change. Some are waiting for an apology. Some are waiting for an explanation. Some are waiting for justice. Some are waiting for closure. But sometimes closure doesn't come from the person who caused the wound. Sometimes closure begins when you decide that the wound will no longer control your future. I looked at Jesus and felt the weight of everything I had carried for so long. And then, silently, I released it. I didn't need a conversation. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need an audience to congratulate me. I simply surrendered it. And something inside me broke open. The anger that had lived inside me for years began to disappear. I felt lighter. I felt free. And I realized that the person I had been waiting to forgive had not been the only one who needed forgiveness. I also needed to forgive myself. I needed to forgive myself for the years I had spent trapped in anger. I needed to forgive myself for the bitterness. I needed to forgive myself for allowing someone else's actions to shape the way I saw myself. And as that burden finally lifted, I understood something that would change the way I lived if I returned to earth. Forgiveness doesn't always make the past beautiful, but it can make the future possible. Then Jesus turned my attention toward the earth. I saw my body beneath the rubble. I saw the people searching for survivors. And suddenly, I realized that I had been given a choice. Either I would remain there, or I would return. But before I could understand what was happening, Jesus gave me one final revelation about forgiveness. It was something I had never expected. And it would become the reason I could never look at another human being the same way again.
The first thing I remember was pain. Not ordinary pain, but the overwhelming weight of returning to a body that had been shattered. My chest felt as though it had been crushed by stones. Every breath burned. My ears were filled with the sound of alarms, hurried footsteps, and voices shouting instructions I couldn't fully understand. Then I opened my eyes. Bright hospital lights blinded me for a moment. Faces leaned over me, their expressions frozen somewhere between fear and disbelief. A doctor looked directly at me, stepped back, and whispered something to another nurse. Within seconds, the room erupted into controlled chaos. "He's awake. Check his pulse. He's responding." I tried to speak, but nothing came out except a weak gasp. Tubes surrounded me. Machines were attached to my body. I could barely move my hands. One of the doctors stared at me, as though he had seen a ghost. Later, after I had regained enough strength to understand what had happened, they told me the truth. They believed I wasn't coming back. My heart had stopped. For a long time, they fought to revive me, while my family was quietly being prepared for the worst. More than one member of the medical team had already accepted that I would become another casualty of the explosion. But somehow, I was alive. My wife was the first member of my family they allowed into the room. The moment she saw my eyes open, she burst into tears. She held my hand so tightly, I thought she would never let go. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Words were unnecessary. She had already mourned me in her heart, and now she was looking at a man who should not have been breathing. When my children visited days later, I couldn't stop crying. I remembered the promise I had made to bring my youngest son a small toy. Instead, all I could offer him was a trembling hand and a father who had returned completely changed. The doctors focused on healing my body, but they had no idea something far greater had happened. Jesus had healed something inside me that no surgeon could ever reach. As my physical strength slowly returned, another battle began. a battle inside my own mind. How could I tell anyone what I had experienced? How could a man known for opposing Christianity suddenly tell people that he had encountered Jesus? Who would believe me? Who would think I had lost my mind? Every possible outcome terrified me. I knew some friends would abandon me. Others would accuse me of betrayal. Some might even consider me an enemy. For weeks I remained silent, replaying every moment of my experience over and over again. I searched for another explanation. Perhaps it had been a dream. Perhaps my injured brain had imagined everything. But the more I tried to explain it away, the more impossible that became. Dreams fade. Hallucinations create confusion. What I experienced left absolute clarity. The hatred that had driven me for years was simply gone. No one had argued me into changing. No one had threatened me. No one had persuaded me. The man who entered that explosion never returned. The man who opened his eyes in that hospital was someone entirely different. As I recovered, I found myself opening the Bible again, not to search for arguments this time, but to search for truth. Passages I had once read only to criticize now seemed filled with meaning I had completely overlooked. They were no longer words on paper. They reflected the mercy I had experienced. For the first time in my life, I understood that genuine strength is not found in making people fear you. It is found in loving, even when hatred seems easier. I began reaching out to people I had wronged. Some refused to speak with me. Others listened with suspicion. A few simply walked away. I didn't blame them. If our roles had been reversed, I might have reacted the same way. But I could no longer live the life I had once defended. Every opportunity I had to spread anger became an opportunity to encourage peace instead. Every conversation that once ended in division became an opportunity to speak with humility. I stopped trying to win arguments. I started praying for changed hearts, beginning with my own. Many people ask me the same question wherever I share my testimony. Are you trying to attack Muslims? My answer is always the same. No. I am not here to condemn anyone, or to mock the faith in which I was raised. I know there are people from every background who sincerely desire peace, justice, and compassion. My testimony is not about declaring myself better than anyone else. It is about admitting how wrong I was about my own heart. The greatest enemy I faced was not another religion. It was the hatred I allowed to grow inside me. That hatred blinded me to truth, convinced me I was righteous, and nearly destroyed my life. If Jesus had not shown me mercy, I have no doubt I would have continued walking that same path until my final breath. That is why I tell this story, not to create fear, not to provoke arguments, not to divide people, but to testify that God's mercy reached a man who believed he was beyond correction. If he could transform someone like me, then no heart is beyond hope. So wherever you are watching from today, I want to ask you one question. If this were your final day on earth, would you be ready to stand before God exactly as you are? Don't wait for an explosion. Don't wait for a hospital bed. Don't wait until the next breath is no longer guaranteed. Examine your own heart. Turn away from bitterness, pride, and hatred. Seek truth with humility. Ask God to reveal Himself to you with sincerity, and follow wherever that truth leads. I never imagined I would tell this story. In fact, I once would have done everything possible to silence someone who did. But after dying and returning, I can no longer remain silent. My name is Rashid Ahmad Khan. This is my testimony, and I pray that my second chance will help someone else find theirs before it is too late.